Daniel Coulbourne. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
I should probably do that before I hit record, but anyway, here we
It's
go.
all good. How we doing?
Doing good. Yeah, Daniel, it's great to meet you in person.
Yeah.
Like I was just saying, like I was literally listening to you in my earbuds like 2 hours ago.
Awesome. Cool.
You're one part of one of my favorite new podcasts, Talking Businessly,
Yeah.
and you're one part of Thunk.dev.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. It's kind of a new journey, like a year in or so, and it's been a blast.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it. But anyway, I was just asking you, like, where are you from originally? So you're in Asheville, North Carolina now. And
Yeah.
then where?
So I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I grew up in Tokyo mostly. My family is from Baltimore, primarily. So my parents are missionaries actually. So I grew up
Okay.
living in Japan. Kind of, we'd spend like 4 years there, and then back in the U.S. for a year, and then 4 years over there, and then back in the U.S. for a year.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, moved
So
back
like how
for my
much
senior
of
year of
your
high school.
so you were born in Japan?
I was born here, but we moved there when I was 3. Um,
Oh, okay.
so from 3 to like 17, I spent most of my life in Japan.
Really? Wow. That much of your childhood
Yeah.
was overseas.
So I was
Incredible.
at one point I was like pretty fluent, and my reading was like there's a lot of symbols you got to learn, and I didn't go to Japanese schools. I went to
Hmm.
international schools. So like my reading was at like a sort of like a middle school level, but like conversationally I was basically fluent.
Wow, incredible. Um, oh man, I didn't know about that about you. Now I have like so many more questions.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
um, so you kind of came back to the States like for the rest of your career and everything, like at age 17, you said?
Yeah, so came back, did my senior year of high school here, and then went to college, and then I never finished college, but that was sort
Okay.
of my entree into living in the U.S.
Very cool. Very cool. Um, Interesting. So yeah, I mean, I thought I would just kind of get your backstory because I only met you through the internet, like from
Hmm.
afar, like really only a few weeks ago.
Hmm.
Kind of hearing about your podcast, hearing about your company and your work. Um, I think we have a lot of like mutual friends, especially in
Yep.
like the Laravel circles and all that. But um, yeah, I mean, where did you come from aside from Tokyo? But like,
Yeah.
what professionally, what were you doing? Before this year, how'd you start out your career?
Yeah, so I actually so I like learned some like web dev stuff. Well, so my dad taught me a little bit of C. So my dad before doing the Lord's work, my dad worked for the NSA as a as
Hmm.
like a programmer in the
Oh wow,
late 80s. So he like knew C and like wrote C for the government. But he was like
wow,
out of
he knows
practice.
all the
Yeah.
secrets.
Yeah, I guess. He was out of practice, but when I was like 14 or so, I think he someone like gave me a laptop, and he was like, "Well, you're not allowed to run this Windows on it because you don't own the license for it." He was very
Hmm.
he was very like meticulous about the ethics of running Windows. And so
Especially in like the Wild West days of computers and
yeah. So I installed like I installed I think like Mandrake Linux, like some like early Linux distro on it. And
Hmm.
my dad was like, "Oh, you're running a Unix system. You want to learn some C?" And so I learned a little C. We made like a golf score calculator.
It's
And that
great.
was basically all the C I ever wrote. But I moved on from there to like, learn some web dev and stuff. I went to college when I came back to the States for philosophy, not for anything tech
Okay.
related. Although I do think philosophy is the move if you're gonna get a useless degree, let it be in philosophy.
It's funny. I think I had this conversation with Ben Orenstein, I think on this podcast, like a year ago or so, about how I sort of regret not doing like CS or something early in my career and in college and all that. And even like in my career, I feel like I learned full stack way later than I should have. I
Mm-hmm.
should have gotten into it so much earlier. So I sort of like regret not going deep on software and programming sooner. But it sounds like you had that from a very early age. And I feel like in that case, like you have that technical background naturally, like through your family and your interest early on, that like philosophy or something other than CS, it seems
Yeah, I
more
don't think I
useful to
had
like
like a
round it
very
out.
I don't know that I had a very deep technical background. Like I learned a little bit of C, but it's not like I
Hmm.
had like a lot of like comp sci fundamentals or anything, right? Like I was just, I wrote a little bit of code. I do think
Interesting.
this is actually there's a guy named Merlin Mann who does some podcasts, and one of his lines is that like the most valuable thing you can leave college with is a liberal arts education and a skill.
Hmm.
And so like that's kind of my opinion on college is like the degree is actually unimportant in my opinion,
Yeah.
unless you're trying to be a doctor or whatever. But like,
That's sort of my
um,
my thinking on it these days too. It's like
but
if you
like,
need the accreditation, but
yeah, well, I mean, the things that I got out of college were some very close friends, one of whom is my business partner, another one of whom works at Thunk. Um,
oh, okay. Yeah, I
some,
want to get into all that. Yeah.
yeah, some general like exposure to thinking, right? Thinking and writing, I think, are
Hmm.
like two things that I learned in a philosophy major. And then like just time, time to sort of percolate. But when
Yeah.
I left
Figure
college,
it all out.
like I got kicked out of college. I went to like this private Christian college. You weren't allowed to smoke cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes. They kicked me out.
Hmm.
And so when I got kicked out of college, I had to like figure something out pretty quick. So I kind of bounced around for a couple of years, but eventually I was like, all right, well, if I'm gonna like have a life, like I kind of know how to make websites, so I guess I'll do
Hmm.
that. And
Yeah.
so I ended up
So you started out like freelancing on your own, or did you work for companies, or?
I did some freelancing stuff, like mostly WordPress stuff, here and there, but always like as a side hustle while I was just like working in restaurants or
Hmm.
doing whatever else. So I eventually like got uh hired by this small agency in Baltimore that was like run by a friend's dad, and he was like, I think he kind of like saw me and was like, man, you look like you're cheap, but you also look like you'll try hard. you know
Right.
so I mean, he also was definitely like giving me a shot, so I'm
Yeah.
grateful for it. But so I started making, like, this was like a video agency mostly, and they were
Hmm.
kind of like trying to expand to be like full service digital agency kind of thing. And
Hmm.
so I sort of like, they were like, well, can you like figure out how to make websites good enough for us to sell? And I was like, sure, let's figure it out,
Mm.
so that's what we did. And it
Yeah.
worked for a while.
I feel like so many people in our industry obviously like kind of started in some form of web development or web design.
Yeah, like
Um,
sort of
I
marketing pages kind of stuff.
yeah, like I mean, I in college I was like hacking, creating a website for my band and stuff like that. But then my first real job was a web design agency. They were like a
Hmm.
web design and branding, and I always look back on that as like one of the best experiences because it was like that was the first thing that introduced me to agency life and like and working with clients and learning how to build things on the web like professionally,
Yeah.
going from like amateur to like, oh, they're throwing me on the Coca-Cola website or the
Right,
AT&T
right, right. Yeah.
website, and I have to like actually make this work and all these different browsers and stuff like that.
Yeah,
um
no, it was a good experience. And like we all also had some, like, that was the first time I like got exposed to like, oh wow, like this code's gonna be in front of people, like real
yeah,
people.
yeah.
And so that was cool. But it was also like the thing about it that was, I think, most interesting is that like there was no web department, right? Like they just kind of were like, I don't know, figure it out,
Yeah.
They're like, do you want to buy any servers? I got there, they were like, do you need to buy any servers or
Should we put a
anything?
computer in the closet?
Yeah, I was like, I don't think so. And so yeah, it
Wow,
was fun.
very cool. So Thunk, I mean, where I want to get into that story. Like, how do you go from there to meeting your business partner and putting together, or even this whole concept of kind of teaming up and starting up like an actual client services
Yes, so from
software
that
development shop?
from that place, I kind of went on to one other sort of like marketing agency, and then I eventually got hired at Titan. And so Titan is sort
Oh,
of
okay.
like,
I didn't know you're at Titan. Okay.
they're sort of, I don't know, especially for the time, kind of like the agency of record in the Laravel world.
Hmm.
And so we, you know, we did a lot of Laravel stuff, and like it was a really cool experience because it was the first time I went from like everywhere else I had been. It was like I was the guy who knew some code, and then there was like maybe I hired people under me at various points, but like I never was like surrounded by like peers who like were like pushing me really hard, you know.
Mm.
And I got to Titan, and it was like, oh no, everyone here's really smart. Like
Yeah.
there's no one
Everyone's
here
like
who's not
super high
super
level.
smart. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so
You must have learned a ton there.
I learned a ton, and I had to level up very quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that was my first exposure maintaining open source. That was my first exposure to a bunch of sort of like architectural stuff in Laravel world and stuff like that. So
So
Titan,
like
I mean,
what year time frame were you there?
20 maybe 2015, I think I joined 2015 or maybe early 2016, somewhere in that range.
Got it.
And then I was there for like 4 or 5 years.
All right
So
on.
that was definitely like the biggest transformational job of my career, was like going from
Yeah, I
sort
bet.
of like junior Laravel dev to, you know, wherever I ended up when I left.
Super interesting. I was these days I guess I'm sort of like a Rails person who's like uh slowly migrating into Laravel world because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like most of my friends are there now. And then before that I was
Welcome.
more like I don't know, like bootstrapping in business, but a lot of years there in WordPress. Um, but I'm a little bit like I don't have as much history on Laravel, like the earlier
Mm-hmm.
days of Laravel and like what it was like around 2015 and like what kind of things were you involved in when you were at Titan? I guess both from like working with clients and the open source stuff, like what was
Yeah.
kind of happening in that whole ecosystem around that period?
Well, that era of Titan was just incredible. So Caleb Porzio, who makes Livewire, he and I
Mm-hmm.
got hired like a couple weeks apart at Titan. So we like started at the same time, and Adam Lavin had just left. I think like we were, that round of hiring that we got caught up in was to replace Adam as he was leaving. So
Okay.
like there was this energy of like people making things, right? Like it was like side project vibes constantly at Titan. So everyone was doing something. Titan does 20% time, right? But
Yep.
anything you make on 20% time belongs to them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we did a bunch of open source. So I made a package called Ziggy, which is sort of like if you're writing React or Vue or something in a Laravel app, and you need access to like your named routes from Laravel in JavaScript, like Ziggy is how you do that now. And
Very cool.
so like I got sort of injected into open source. I had to learn how to maintain open source and deal with pull requests and issues and all this stuff. I learned like React and Vue, and so back then we were doing a lot of like, back then it was much more common to do sort of like server side routed or server side rendered pages with like either like one big like div id app with like
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah.
like your React app in it, or like Blade with like sprinkles of sort of Vue or React components inside of it.
Yeah.
So that was kind
Yeah.
of a
Yeah.
really common pattern back then. That's what we were doing a lot of. But yeah, I mean, it
Very
was
cool.
like we got thrown into everything. It was really fun.
I feel like Titan was basically like the thought bot of the PHP Laravel
Certainly. And I think
world.
they took a
Yeah.
lot of inspiration from Thoughtbot.
Yeah. Whereas like Thoughtbot was that for Rails and Ruby.
Mm-hmm.
So like
we
is,
all
is
listened
that
to like Ben's podcast when he was at
Mhm.
Thoughtbot, and like
Yeah,
all,
yeah, for
all of
sure.
the sort of like, yeah, all of that thought, we were
How
aware of Thoughtbot heavily.
I'm coming at this like from the very much like the outside, and also like my early years of my career, I was in like web design and web design agencies and things like that, and then bootstrapping some businesses. And now I'm just like after years taking years off of the consulting game altogether. I'm just dipping my toes back into it now, and I'm sort of trying to learn about how these different consulting models and ecosystems sort of work. So my picture in my mind of like Titan and a Thoughtbot is like really well-known, high exposure open source projects and credibility in this really popular ecosystem. In Titan's case, like, the Laravel ecosystem, PHP. So like how much activity like internally among the team and everything is like on that stuff, and how much is kind of like high
20%
ticket
of the activity.
It's like literally like I know that the concept's like 80-20, but is it like
no,
really
it's actually
like
it's just Fridays. It's like Fridays we work on blog posts, open source, podcasting, whatever. And so that's like a model that we're working towards at Thunk right now. So like
right now, seems like it.
Right now, all of our like employees are contractors, right?
But even given like the super high exposure of like the big projects with like all the pull requests and activity that must be going into it, is that's really like a day a week for a company like that to maintain?
Yeah, that's what we did. Wow. Every once in a while, someone would like, we had something called the bench at one point, which was like, we would have one person like a month who was like not on projects. And that person would just kind of like, clean up messes internally. And so that might be like, hey, I'm getting behind on my pull requests. Like, can you go like deal with some of these pull requests for me? Or, hey, our internal, like this internal tool of ours is bad. Could you go fix it up? Or, hey, can you write a Slack bot that solves this problem for us internally? Like we would just have a person who is there to just like kind of like mess around. And that wasn't all the time. I feel like that was for like a couple months, but it was a cool concept,
Yeah, I bet. And like, is that where all of the lead flow essentially comes from? Is like you guys are like have these like high exposure projects, and that's how.
I mean, so back then, Dan Sheets, who was one of the founders, he was biz dev guy, and he is good. He it definitely wasn't just marketing. But that's like, as far as like my philosophy at Thunk, it's like I have relationships, and like those relationships, like I've got a really good friend who's a very he's like inside Keller Williams. He's like a big deal, I guess. And so he has like a very large like real estate agency, right? And then he also does like high level training of like large numbers of real estate agents and stuff. And so I talk to him a lot, and his thing is basically like, look, people only buy and sell a house like once every 10 years. Right. So you're not going to talk anyone into buying or selling a house they weren't going to buy or sell already. Right. But the point is, when they buy and sell a house, you want them to call you. And so that's kind of how I feel about someone spending $100,000 on a web app. Right. It's like, people only spend $100,000 on a web app every once in a while. They're not doing it. Well, some places are doing it every day. And if you're one of those places, please give me a call. But like, if someone's going to build a large web application, it's not something they do like at the drop of a hat. But what you want to do, I think, in my opinion, is kind of like build up mind share. Ideally with open source, it's like get code that you wrote into their application already. Right.
Yeah.
So that like when you're having a conversation, you can be like, oh, you're using Ziggy, I wrote that. Oh, you're using verbs, like I wrote that. That's in there. Blah blah blah. It gives you a lot of credibility to kind of. They're like, oh well, we already trust your code now. We may as well continue trusting your code.
The like that's the other thing that I'm sort of starting to like wrap my head around and just figure out like what all the options are, what my preferences are in terms of like consulting service model. Because again, I've done like marketing work, I've done design work, but I haven't really explored like actual software development as a service. I've only learned full stack to build my own products. And I'm just only now starting to open up to working with clients. At least at the time of this recording, I'm working with some, but like it. So I guess in both your experience with Thunk and before that, like in Titan and stuff, like, do you find that most of the projects with clients are like big custom internal software for organizations, or working on like public facing products?
Both. Yeah.
building new products for startups from the ground up? Like, what's the mix of these things?
Yeah. I mean, we've built like sort of internal, if I had a nickel for every internal CRM tool I've built, I'd be a
Yeah.
wealthy man. But we've also I've also built like mobile apps that have millions of active users, and like things like that. So it really depends. Like, work begets work, and so like in my experience, it's like if you do good work, people call you, and
Yeah.
there's more stuff. I don't feel like capable of doing outbound sales, like it's just like, I don't know how people do it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the mentality is to like make cold calls or whatever. I don't even know how I would go about it. Like, it
Right.
seems impossible to me.
Yeah.
So the only way I know how to drive business is basically like do a good job and then make sure people are aware that we exist,
Yeah.
and then, so the podcast and Laracon talks and all of that stuff is like in service of that,
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. I love it. Um, yeah. I mean, let me hear more of your story. So you're at Titan a bunch of years. You're working with some amazing people. What leads you to go out on did you go out on your own after that?
So no, I went to work at Internachi, which is like it's a nonprofit. It's a trade organization for home inspectors. So basically, like,
Okay. I've heard you guys like reference that on the podcast. I'm like, what are they talking about?
yeah. So they're a client now. One of the cool things about Thunk is that all of our former employers are addicted to us and can't can't stop working with us. But Internachi is my former employer, and they're currently a client. But yeah, it's a trade organization for home inspectors. They maintain like a huge education platform for continuing education and certifications. They talk to all these like different government APIs to keep everyone's licensure up to date and all this stuff. And so I worked there for about a year as COVID was starting, basically. The first time I ever saw someone wear a mask was on my flight to Philly to meet my new coworkers.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, I guess this might be a thing. And
Got
so
a bit of a situation here.
Yeah. So that was like February, March of 2020. And so then I worked there for a year. I was like, I don't know, I was just restless at that moment, and I was kind of like soft looking for a client, and I was like, if I find someone who I feel like can give me like 3 months of steady work at, my desired rate, like, I'm just going to bail and go do that and like kickstart a freelance thing, And so that's what I did. I found like a little project. Actually, it was a pretty big project, and did that, worked on that, found more projects, just sort of transitioned into freelancing. I took a brief vacation into crypto and made like an NFT project.
Most people did.
Yeah. And then I made just enough money to pay the taxes on the money I made, which was
okay.
Because like you earn the money, then it decreases in value, but you have to pay taxes on the amount it was worth when you got it. So that was fun.
Right.
But yeah, so then I sort of scaled my freelancing to the point where I was like, well, I've got like enough people asking for work that I can't do it all. So I was raising my rates.
I want to sort of pause here because like one of the big themes that I just love to explore on this podcast is talking to people about these transitions, like moving from one company into the next, or deciding to sell a business, or going out on your own and putting together a new consultancy. Like I'm always interested in like, what was your mindset at the time? Where did you think you were going? What was the driver to say like, I think I want to find a project and go out on my own? And like was the thinking like, let's just open up and like create freedom in my schedule and optionality? Or were you like, maybe this is a path to get into my own product someday? Like, what were you sort of like going for?
I got an ADHD diagnosis, and that like made a lot of things very clear to me. So I've always had trouble in the morning. I've not like woken up well. The schedule of like working for someone has never been great. The sort of like, daily stand-ups and, that sort of like environment has never been great for me. Like a lot of my best work is done at 11 p.m. Some of my second best work is done at 4 a.m. You know, you'll catch me at weird times and weird places writing code. And so I kind of came to the realization, I was like, okay, my whole life I have had this thing. I've only just found out I've had it. And my whole life I've been trying to basically adjust me to fit everything else. And so it was kind of an experiment in like, okay, well, could I just not fight this at all? And just say like, well, I'm just going to like go where the dopamine takes me. And like, see if I can not compromise to we just talked to Joel Claremont on our podcast called From No Compromises, but see if I can not compromise on like see if I can wake up when I want to wake up and, you know, do stuff when I naturally would, and see if I'm successful at that, you know? And I did. And, you know,
and I feel like you're obviously like your line of work, but also like the way that our industry tends to work, especially in these years, as you're into like especially COVID, but after that, of course, remote and flexible work is not new, but you know, when COVID came around, but it really accelerated. So it's like between your recognition and network in the industry and your experience kind of coinciding with that, like totally acceptable, like work lifestyle thing, you know?
Yeah. So I just wanted to see if I could make it work, and it totally worked. Like no one cared. I think I got on a pretty degenerate sleep schedule right at first, where I was just like fully like up until like 7 a.m. every day and starting at like 4 p.m. and like it was dark. I don't recommend that. But like,
by the way, are you single, like kids?
No,
married?
I'm married. Married, no kids.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, it's chill. But like so I was like on a pretty degenerate thing, kind of like rebalanced to somewhere in the middle, which is kind of what I do now, which is like I'm usually up till like 3 and up around like 11 or 12, and it's real chill. And so I just you pretend I live on the West Coast, you know?
Right.
That's what I tell people.
I heard you talking about that on like you're on West Coast time. You know, and I'm sort of the same way too. Like I'm like podcasts are like one of the only things that I actually do like live on a call with people. I'm like I'm like extremely async with everyone else, you know? And my team is like, a lot of them are overseas or in different time zones in the US. And, it just works, you know?
I'm a big pairing guy.
I often forget that like I'll be traveling and like my wife has family in Asia. We'll be going back and forth. And sometimes I'll go on like these entire trips and like all the people that I'm working with like have no idea. It's just normal messaging.
Because your time zones changed, but they didn't notice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm a big pairing guy, but like and that's like the most difficult thing is like, I want to pair a lot, but like the overlap window is small. And so I have to be extremely intentional about like dedicating those overlap hours to pairing. And so that's important if you're going to be me in this exact moment. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically like I'm pairing from like on most days, except for like Tuesdays, basically. I'm pairing from like probably like 2 to 5, you know, which is just like my preferred kind of like overlap area where it's like I've gotten my stuff taken care of, I've answered all the messages and stuff, and then I sit down to take like a big 3-hour chunk out of something, you know?
So like who are you generally pairing with? Your team members, that your teammates at Thunk, or are you working with like clients, or who are you pairing up with?
Both. So I have clients who a lot of people want to like one of the sort of like things that people want when they hire us is to pair with me, right? And so and part of that's just because like we've put a big emphasis on pairing, so I've made my own bed there, but I also really enjoy it and I preach the benefits of it. And so it's actually really interesting. So I started freelancing, I started doing these mentoring clients. And so I'd have a couple of people where it was like, hey, let's like have a 1-hour call once a week. You save a hard problem for me, and then we'll like try and figure it out. And if we don't solve it on the call, we'll at least like point you in a really good direction. Right.
Yep.
And So I think at this point I'm like the guy hasn't actually signed a contract, but at this point I think I'm like 3 for the long-term ones, turning them into like signed contracts for like real work, you know?
Yeah, it's like a great
Um,
first thing, and then
and you
yeah, we
can
work.
do it for however long. Like you can do it for, sometimes it's like, we're going to do mentoring calls for like 6 weeks, and then you're going to realize I should just pay this guy to actually do work. Some people
Right.
it's like, yeah, we're going to do mentoring calls for 2 years, and then eventually the thing's going
Hmm.
to come along that you're ready to do, you know?
Wow.
And
And
so
who's doing that with you? So is it like
often
engineers? Is it like
solo devs or solo founders, like
okay?
people who don't have like a highly skilled set of coworkers that they can like bounce things off of.
Hmm.
Or sometimes it's like people who are like sort of leaders of teams where like they feel like they're not learning a lot from the people who they work with. And so they just kind of want someone else who's like, you know, smart and knows what's going on, uh, to work on stuff with.
It's super interesting to hear you talk about all this because I've been tuning into your podcast, and one of the things that I love about it, like your dynamic with your partner John, is like it sounds like you guys are really like goal oriented and focused on like tracking progress and
John is, yes.
he sounds like
John
it,
is,
but
and that's why he's awesome.
you guys are both like super interesting with this thing because I feel like there are so many, especially like solo freelancers who are making that transition into like a quote unquote like real company or agency or consultancy. It's so easy to like just keep the sloppiness of freelancing and let
Yeah.
that pour over into like the company culture. But it sounds like you guys are taking it pretty um seriously, or like being very intentional about like what types of clients and projects, how do we bill for these clients, what are our goals for this quarter, for this year, and like tracking progress on those. And um I
Yeah.
mean,
So I
how
mean,
how did you transition from your uh like like going where your energy takes you as a solo freelancer to sort of like teaming up with John and like putting a concept together for what Thunk is, if that
yes. Well,
makes
so
sense.
during COVID, John and I built a game with Jacob, a guy who works at Thunk now, and I basically taught them to code during that process, right? And so like the
Hmm.
origin of Thunk was basically like, hey, for the past like 3 years, we've been like learning to code and pairing for hours and hours and hours a week on like Sundays to like build this game.
Hmm.
You're now good enough. I can sell your code. Like, let's go, you know? And so that kind of
Interesting.
started it. John was at a product company and like wanted to try something else. He was really enjoying programming and was like, let's see if I can do something with this.
Hmm.
Jacob was not in tech at all. And we're like, well, we'll make you the beginnings of a tech career. And then if you want to keep it going, you can keep it going, you know? And
Yeah, very
so,
cool.
yeah, so we did that. And it was, John is how he is. Like, I don't think I would start a business with anyone who wasn't like John, right? Like, I
Hmm.
love other like ADHD, like, did too much acid early in their life type of people, but they don't all like. I don't think it would be a good like partnership. Me and someone else like me. In fact,
Yeah.
like I think Matt Stauffer and Chris Morrell, my two most recent employers, are pretty like me in that way, in that they're like
Hmm.
both kind of like high energy, like distractible but driven, and that like lets them get a lot done, but in weird ways, you know?
Yeah.
And so that to me, like you need someone who is very detail oriented and more worried. Like John is just more
Yep.
worried than me. I am just absolutely convinced that it's all going to be fine. It doesn't matter, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need someone to think it's all going to be fine
And
and it
so
doesn't matter so that you can do weird things. But you also need someone who's going to be like, well, if it doesn't matter enough, we go to prison because we don't pay taxes. So like, you
right.
gotta, you gotta figure it out. So John is
Yeah.
certainly like the anchor that makes the company, uh, as stable and good as it is. And
Would
I
you
think
say that
I'm
like
kind of the person who drives it to be wild.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely it makes sense. It sounds like you guys are a good match in that way. Like, when you sort of formalized Thunk into like this company, was the thinking that like the types of projects and clients would sort of just be an extension or a continuation of what you've been doing with clients before that,
That's what we thought at
or any like
first.
strategic change there?
Yeah, so that's what we thought at first, and then we were like, so I don't know how, it seems so stupid that we thought this at first, but like we thought at first that it would be like, oh yeah, Daniel has a freelance business. We're going to like turn Jacob and John into programmers and like clone Daniel basically because I taught them to code, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like we're gonna clone Daniel so that we can do like 3 times as much of Daniel's freelancing business. Not even like it's honestly like mad disrespectful to John that we thought this way because it was like John is like an incredible PM
Sounds like he's
and
more of a product manager. Yeah.
yeah, and that's where his like deep skill is. He's certainly a senior PM and more of a junior dev, whereas
Uh-huh.
I'm more of a senior dev. And so like the idea that like we were just gonna use him only for code was silly. And so
Yeah.
now, I mean, I would say half of our revenue right now, at least, is John's product side of the business, and
Yeah.
so and it's really cool because they cross sell, right? And so like
Yeah, I
we
wanted
go
to
into
ask you
people.
about that. Like how do you structure engagements now? I mean, you guys just did a whole episode about like how like experimenting with different like hourly and weekly models and things like that. But I'm more interested in like what types of projects and engagements and like um so like if when a client comes in, you're thinking, are you quoting it or scoping it out in terms of like number of hours on the retainer to build XYZ? Or like
So
where does like product management come in where it's like we're going to spend this amount of time or effort in figuring out what it is we're building
yeah,
and
so
planning that?
I've always just like the way that I do, I guess you'd call it sales, but like the way that I close business, right, is like I'm always looking for you to like immediately sign a contract for like 3 weeks of getting started, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like whether or not we're gonna work together for like 9 months, like the first thing I want you to do is like pay me for 2 or 3 weeks, right? Um, and in that
Like a
time, I'm
paid like discovery period
yeah,
kind of.
because I'm just not gonna like back in the old days at like marketing agencies and stuff. So many of my hours went to like proposals and
Mm-hmm.
RFPs and like all this. I've never done an RFP for my own
Yeah.
money. Like
Yeah.
couldn't be me. Uh, and so
Yeah.
like it's like look, if I would love to onboard into your project and learn everything there is to know about your company and figure out your business model and figure out what's wrong with your code base and give you some sort of broad estimates of like what it's going to take to get you to the promised land, but that's certainly not going to happen for free, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
like I'm more than happy to have you pay me to tell me how much you're going to pay me, like, and that's just
And
those
that's
are the
been
sorts
like
of
the
clients I
model
want to
for.
work with, like,
So they're coming in like we have this general need, and sort of like step one is like here's the rate for the first couple of weeks, and then we go from there.
yeah, so I'm like, okay, here's my hourly, why don't we like spend a week or two and I'll like kind of dig around in there and we'll try and get a couple of PRs made. Just probably it'll be things like fixing some broken tests, getting your migrations running correctly, like, just like some basic cleanup stuff that is like going to be valuable whether or not we work on this project long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be things that we would do first anyway that allow us to like work on your project successfully,
Mm-hmm.
um, and in the meantime, by doing that, I'm going to get in touch with your code base. I'm going to get a sense of scale. You get to have me sign an NDA so that I'm like allowed to like clone your repo on my computer and mess with it, like
Mm-hmm.
like it just kind of like opens the door, and then it's much easier to sell 9 months or something once you've sold 2 weeks, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also much easier to it's much easier for them to get a sense of like how I work, and because I don't want to sign a 3 month contract with someone who doesn't like how I work.
Yeah. Yeah. This is still an area that I'm like still like sort of new to when it comes to client services, because like in the past I have a lot of experience with like companies coming in and saying like we need a new website, we need a
Mm-hmm.
new brand marketing website or whatever. And I've sold to companies saying like I've sold marketing services. Like we want to hire this, like my previous company, Audience Ops, like we want to hire you guys to do content marketing for us. I understand the mechanics of that.
Mm-hmm.
Software development seems so different in terms of like the initial problem or pain that brings a new lead into your pipeline. And then like, yeah, like this whole idea of even just like a paid couple of weeks to figure out what's what, and then figure out how. So like, are they coming in with like, they must come in with like some big picture goal or need in mind. Like we need to do this big product initiative this year.
Mm-hmm. So
and it,
yeah,
like obviously that you're not going to know how long or what's involved, and that's where the first few weeks come in. So like, is it like, do they have an in-house team and they're coming to you for like some extra expertise coming in? Or
sometimes I think we're actually most valuable to places that don't have software teams, honestly, because if they don't have software teams, they don't know how to think about software.
Right.
And that's where John is like incredibly valuable. Is like, well, here's all the things you're not thinking about that come with owning and building software.
Yeah.
But I think
might have
like
a concept or a market need, but like now here's like 1,000 more questions that you'll need to think through. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like anybody can build software, right? Like you can get software built, right? You can hire guys from India or do whatever you need to do to get some software built, right? But owning software is like a very hard project. And like one of the things that I think one of the places that John is most valuable is like in the long tail of owning software, you know, like, and so like a lot of leads. So we do like legacy rescues all the time, which is like, so like, here's a couple of recent client calls. So it's like company comes to us, they say, okay, we do like white label e-commerce where it's like, we make like private e-commerce stores for companies to sell their uniforms to their own employees, right? So it's like you're like a large hospital chain that like needs to sell embroidered scrubs to all of your nurses or whatever, right? And like we've got this app, it's a Laravel app, it's really, really old, it's really, really slow, only parts of it are Laravel, like there's lots of problems with it, we don't like the data in it, we're rebuilding it from scratch, we're halfway through, it's Livewire, we're out of our depth a little bit, can you help us, right? And so the conversation is like, sure, like let me get in there and see what's going on, right? And then what happens is like, okay, well, can we break off like a clean enough chunk of this for me to work on that that doesn't sort of like step on your toes too much? I do that for a while, do that a couple more times, clean little chunks. Then at a certain point, it's like, hey, they ask the question like, hey, when is this going to be done? Like, when are we going to have our new web app, right? And it's like, boy, howdy, I sure don't know, because I've only worked on these discrete chunks of it. I don't have a sense of like the full scope of everything you're trying to do. However, my business partner, John, is like really good at sort of like building out roadmaps, figuring out like the order of the projects that we're going to do and how we're going to do them and getting a sense of scale of those things. So like, why don't we get John in here to kind of like build you guys a roadmap, right?
So especially when they don't have anyone doing the PM, the product management function, whether that's an
and in this case,
PM
it's like
or founder, it's like John is here to like let's put some order and a roadmap together.
Yeah, and then in this case, it's like not only do they not have a PM, but like they're not really doing any process of like most of their tickets are kind of like not tickets. They're kind of like, you know, maybe some GitHub issues. Maybe some GitHub issues or whatever, but
like they got to where they are before they hired you with like, all right, we've got these big goals. Let's just hire a bunch of developers,
people.
but not PMs, not more experienced leads to really organize the project. And then it's like, okay.
And usually if someone calls you in the middle of a rewrite, it's because the place they need help is owning software, right? Owning and maintaining software is their problem. They successfully built software enough to get a business that has enough money to pay us, right? But then the owning and maintenance of that software was a problem enough that here they are 5 years later trying to rewrite it from the ground up, right?
Interesting.
And so like something in there went wrong, right?
Yeah, interesting.
And sometimes it's like we made bad tech choices. We like, shouldn't have used, whatever we used.
The picture in
Sometimes
my
that's a
mind
problem.
is like a company that has some level of success with like a V1 product, even in the market for several years. At some point, they bring on like a CTO
Yeah.
to own all that. And I guess they do have a CTO, or maybe they're like they're sort of like without a seat. Like why would a company like come to a Thunk
Yeah. I think
to
it's
take control of it all?
so, and this is, I think, one of the things John and I talk about a lot is like, there's a lot of times you're in this place where you're like, we've built a thing, we're in the market, like we sort of see the next step. We know we need to hire some people to get there. The people who we could hire are like, we could hire like project managers, product managers, whatever, that side of the business. We could hire a CTO. We could hire some senior devs. We could hire a bunch of junior devs. Like, but I don't really know like which of these things is going to accelerate this the most, right?
Right.
And like,
Right.
where is my money best spent? The cool thing about Thunk is like you just pay us, and we will sort of like scale up and down how much of which of those things you're getting at any given time, right?
Mm.
And so it's like, hey, like some weeks are going to be product heavy weeks, other weeks are going to be like architecture heavy weeks, other weeks it's just like, hey, we have a massive volume of tickets that need finishing,
Right.
and like
Right. And you
we
guys are like small and lean enough to be able to
to
move
flex
pretty
into
efficiently,
those.
and yeah.
Yeah, and we've got enough different clients that's like, hey, every week, like we can kind of like shift around priorities. So it's like, hey, this person needs more product this week. These people needs more like architecture
Mm-hmm.
stuff this week. This week, this person just needs like a bunch of progress on tickets. So like we're gonna have the junior guys just crushing tickets over here while I'm over doing architecture here and John's doing like roadmap stuff here,
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to get into your all the work that you guys are doing on products, like the 20% of the 80
Yeah.
20 mix. Just before we sort of get into that, maybe as we get into it, is like, so as I understand it, you guys are now up to four of you. Like there's you and John and two
Me
other
and
people
John
on
and
your
Josh
team.
and Jacob. Yeah. Me and the
Okay.
three J's. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so the transition to bringing on a third and a fourth person, was it like you have enough simultaneous projects going on that you just need more people to handle the load?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's literally it. And I mean, at a certain point, it's like once you have these people working with you, neither of these people, like we've been super clear with both of them. Is like, look, I'm not promising you this is forever. I'm saying like, as long as the work keeps coming in, like we're young enough that like I'm still scared that the work's going to stop coming in.
Yeah.
But like, as long as the work keeps coming in, like we'll keep you on. We're not going to like replace you with some other contractor.
One of the cool things I heard you guys talking about a couple weeks ago on your podcast was this idea of like keeping the team small, but everyone on the team is developing that full stack skill set.
Yeah, totally.
Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, but everyone is building that capability at all levels. And like that really that was a sort of a spark for me to think through what I'm doing here. It's so opposite from how I've built service businesses in the past. Like I had a previous one that was like a productized service where we had like 4 or 5 like really defined roles, and I just kept hiring more of the manager role or more of the writer role or more of the assistant role, and just like multiplying that way, and everyone plays their part in the process. And and now I'm thinking much more like organically, like everyone, like I'm sort of full stack. There should be more like full stack.
There's huge pros to it, right? Like, because the flexibility internally is just insane, right? Like you can handle pretty much anything anyone throws at you, whether that's like, hey, we have a giant like PM problem that needs like multiple heads on it. Cool, right. We can do something with that. And like I remember John came to my house one time. He was just in town for something, and we stayed up all night building this like insane like what are they called? You make them like in Figma. It's like there's like branching logic, like a decision tree type of thing.
Like a mock-up. Okay, yeah, like a workflow.
But it was like an event sourcing workflow for like this client that needed this implementation, and like we needed to kind of like show them like a little bit of the vision for it, And so we just like stayed up all night building this thing together, and it was awesome. We just drank coffee until 2 a.m. And So
Awesome.
that's really fun. Then there's times where it's like, we need to like buckle down and grind and like write code to like, we need to build, 100 Livewire components for this UI or whatever. And sometimes it's like, hey, we need to actually like build. So Verbs is our event sourcing package that we built and maintain. So it's like, hey, this client needs like things that Verbs can't currently do. So we're like actually just gonna like sit down and like grind on Verbs until we like build the package up to serve the needs of this client. And so
Yeah.
that's really
Like
interesting as well.
build up your byproducts to both serve the client and your internal products. So,
Yeah.
I mean, let's get into that. Like, so I hear you guys talking about Verbs a lot. Like that's your open source library that you've been sort of building up and putting out there. I hear you guys talking about a SaaS product. Of course, you have the podcast, which I think of as like a sort of a product in itself. Well, all right, like I want to get like the rundown on each of those, especially whatever you can share about the SaaS product. But like, again, like was your, as you guys are thinking about the concept for Thunk as a company, 80-20, we're going to grow a client services business, but we're going to have 20% of our time and resources dedicated to our own products and projects. Is that the vision going forward, or is it more like maybe someday these products become the thing and client work phases out, or how are you thinking about all that?
I don't know that it's 80-20 going forward. No. I think that 80-20 is like, honestly, 80-20 is like quality of life. Like I don't want to burn our people out. Just like eating shit on client. Wait, sorry, can I swear here? Sorry, I did it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Swear away.
I don't want to burn our people out like grinding on client projects 100% of their life and just like coming in and being like, I have assignments for you, do them, like you can't build cool full stack creative people from top down assignment based stuff. Like you have to give these people like space to build things in, right? And like if I, again, going back to Titan, like the thing that Titan did the best was like they hired killers and they gave them space, and like if you hire killers and give them space, like cool things happen, right? And so
cool.
That's the plan, is basically like hire killers and give them space. We're going to have some high level directions to that, right? Like internally we always want to be building open source. Open source is just like, I understand the business model and I care a lot about open source, And so because I understand the business model and I care a lot, like that's just something
it's just a core thing to,
if I made $100 million tomorrow, I would just make open source for the rest of my life. Like that's what, that's what I would do with my career. Like open source is just good. It's good for the world. It's fun. I just enjoy it.
And so
open
it's
source
like a fundamental, like core pillar of what you guys are building here. I love it.
Well, it's what we're built on, right? Like if you look at
Laravel,
what the business is, Laravel, Livewire, PHP itself is open source. Like everything it's all open source, top to bottom, and like, Caleb, my buddy, who makes Livewire, is always talking about like you owe a debt to the layer below you, right? And so like Caleb owes a debt to Taylor for like building the ecosystem for him to thrive in, right? And like the filament guys owe a debt to Caleb for building a layer for them to thrive in, So like I think that, like, to me, like I think that sort of like standing on the shoulders of giants aspect of open source, which leads to a place now where it's like 70% of the computers in the world are running Linux. Like if you think about like every server and whatever in the world, and like 70% of the internet's running PHP, and like it's just like crazy stuff like this, where it's like, all these companies invest billions of dollars building like, all this like expensive software, but like open source is just better,
So how about like getting into a SaaS, right? Like this is one of those things that I feel like there are plenty of examples of client services agencies who successfully, like, well, a lot of them give it a shot and fail. A few sort of successfully make that transition. I wonder about like, I feel like there are a couple examples of like successful agencies who keep the agency growing successfully, and then they also successfully kind of spawn out SaaS companies out of it. Um, this SaaS, I mean, what can you share about the product itself and
Sure.
the vision for it and the ambition? Like, what is it? Is it like a small product? Let's see what happens, or is it like let's
Totally.
get serious about this?
It's a small product. Let's see what happens, and we're going to build up multiple of them, right?
Love it.
So this is not like we're not like pivoting the company into this product, right? It's like we always want to be working on a product. Eventually, one of them will make some money, right? But like our thinking around this is like we're a product agency, right? Like we're not just devs, and as not just devs, like if we were just devs, we could just build open source and keep our skills up to snuff and like eat our own dog food that way and like write the code we really wish we could write in our open source repos because, you know, that's the place to do that. For a product manager, you can't really do that. I guess you could like PM verbs or whatever, but like if you want to build like a full on product and like be a PM and do it exactly the way you wish you could internally, you can't just do services without sort of eating your own dog food a little bit, right?
Yep.
And so building our own products is sort of a way for us to kind of crystallize our opinions and strengthen our own processes.
Yeah, because there's always like a give and
create
take.
some passive income, maybe. You know?
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like there always must be sort of like yeah, you're always going to do your best work that you can in the structure of working with clients, but then there's always some give or take, some I don't know, like parameters that you're working within. But then like when you're working on your own stuff, it's like you have free reign to do it however you want and like the most ideal, optimal path to bringing a product into existence. I mean, what are like some of like the like what's hard, what's easy about comparing your client projects to working on your own SaaS product?
Well, so the product we're building is called Paper Cuts, right? And it's just an internal PM tool. So basically, John has it's basically like a productized version of John's PM philosophy. And so like there's everything comes down to like what problem am I solving right now? And like what problem does this thing solve? And never talking in solution statements, always talking in problem statements, and leaving solutions up to solution people, and stuff like that. And so this is basically like, we keep running into this problem where we go into companies and it's like, oh, like the dev team is just receiving solutions from all over the business. The business is just throwing solutions at the dev team. And sometimes they're just like blindly implementing them. And that gets you in bad places, right?
Yeah.
And so John's always not only coaching the devs on how to ask for problems, but also like coaching other parts of the business on like how to talk in problems and how to communicate with your dev team and stuff like that. And so this is basically a tool that just lets you manage communication from other parts of the business to the developers.
Yeah. I really liked you guys talking about the concept of like every new, like you have to rank the problems, right? Like if you're submitting a problem, you have to say like this comes before or after everything else that you submitted. That concept really sort of stuck with me.
Yeah, it's like, well, they are going to get worked on in an order.
Yeah, like, I feel like that's like my whole like my whole work life on the product is just a constant list and like shifting around priorities.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the product, and like the nice thing about it is like we're sure that we can sell it into some of our existing clients. So like at the very least, it will make a couple $100 a month or whatever, and it's one of those things where it's like, well, we're going to get new clients. We'll be able to sell it into them. Maybe eventually like we can market it and grow it. We don't really know how marketing works, so we're going to have to learn that. So that'll be fun.
That's the best marketing strategy there is. We don't really know how marketing works. So
yeah,
exactly. I mean, I love, like, honestly, like I feel like like so many of the best products are like, I hate it when people say like, oh, we didn't do any marketing, but it's honestly, like if the product fits, if the product meets an actual need that people resonate with, at the end of the day, it's the product. Like,
yeah, exactly.
SEO, ads, like none of that stuff is really going to move the needle unless the product is fundamentally fitting someone,
Yep, totally. And like the process for building it is awesome because like John gets to just like fully go off on his like it's great to see John like fully flexing, and like we're also like John's writing most of the code on Papercuts right now, and it's all Livewire and verbs, like Livewire and verbs, everything. And like writing code with Livewire and verbs at the same time is just so effing productive. It's like insane. Like it's so like the amount of stuff you can get done quickly is like crazy. And then eventually you're like, oh, I should probably make a model here so that I can like write nice queries,
Right.
But like early on, like I don't make models when I'm like playing around on toy projects. Like I just make like states and events and like see what happens. And then eventually it was like you can delete all your events and just have models or whatever. But
that's awesome.
As like
it's awesome to just be able to like use your own
tool.
Stuff and use your like the best tools that you know how to just go on these products.
It's a blast.
And I really love that idea of like, especially for a product dev company, to just build out your own portfolio of products,
And you have to do it like playfully, right? Like you can't like take it too seriously. Like this is not the revenue driving side of the business right now. Like, so like, let's just make the thing that we want to make, and like, we'll see if we can sell it to anyone or not. Like, I think we can. I think it solves a real problem. But like,
like looking back on my the last like 10 years or so of what I've been doing, I feel like I dabbled in this sort of model early on, and then I abandoned it and tried to go like all in on product after product. And this is especially for a bootstrapper, self-funded.
Profitable from day one. It's easy.
Profitable from day one, and keep the client work and the client consultancy going. I think for me, it was like early on, like I did my best to phase that out as soon as possible. But I think that this model of like build out a portfolio of a bunch of ideas because you don't know which one are which ones are really going to get that traction.
And I mean, and this is a
and the consultancy work can be great too. That's the other thing. It can be a beautiful model in itself.
Well, and they feed each other, right? It's like you can fund the product development with the consulting work, and you can inform the consulting work with like all of your sort of like internal dogfooding on the product work, right?
Exactly.
So I think they sort of feed each other. But yeah, like if you look at like internally, like there's tons of agencies that now have products in the Laravel space, like Spotsy, Beyond Code. Those are both sort of like, services organizations that built products in the space that are now mostly paying the bills,
Yeah.
And like,
for sure.
I think both of them still have a client or two around. Spotsy, I think, might even have more. I'm not sure. But like, there's plenty of like examples of people doing this well,
Yeah, for sure. Well, Daniel, this is super, super interesting. I love how you guys are doing your podcast. Like it's sort of like your internal, like weekly, like, stand-up meeting with you and your partner, John. And it's like, I love that kind of like build in public type content. And especially when it's like team members talking about the current company. Super cool. Keep doing it.
It's a blast. And like, I was heavily encouraged by like, I think Adam, when he first left Titan to sell his refactoring to collections book, or refactoring to collections went well, and that allowed him to like leave Titan and kind of start his career. Every time he did something, he would like make a big blog post that said like, I made $70,000 doing this thing. And like, hey, here's how I made $100,000 doing this thing. And like, he would break it down step by step. Here's what I'm doing. Did everything in the public,
man. It's, there's so many like theory out there and like how to do this step by step, or like books on learning stuff. But like I learn by either doing or following along with the real-time stories of what other people are doing. It's the best. So more people should be doing it.
And like watch us mess it up, and then you can not make the mistakes we
exactly.
make.
Exactly, man. Well, it was great to connect with you, Daniel. And
awesome.
Keep doing it.
Thanks, man.
All right.